Namaskar. Welcome to Lokayan IAS Academy. In this video lecture series, we are going to discuss about how you can enrich your essay and various different problems that a lot of students encounter while writing the essay. In the first lecture itself, we are going to start with introduction. So 5 different types of introduction which are required for which can be used. So in this video, we will talk about 5 different types of introduction that you can use for your UPSC essay, UPSC or MPSC essay. Let's get started. So before we talk about how to write a good introduction, it is very important to understand what exactly constitutes an introduction. There is a lot of misconception that the opening paragraph alone itself constitutes of an introduction, but that is not the case. Let me explain you how it works. So there are basically 3 parameters that we have for a good introduction. The first of which is the attention grabber. So this in common knowledge is understood as the intro itself. So this can be either your first statement or first 2 statements. We will use various different types, various different methods to basically enrich or highlight the So before we get started about how to write a good introduction, it is very important to understand what exactly is an introduction. So it might seem very futile at first, but we need to understand that introduction itself carries 3 different segments. So this is not a common knowledge. A lot of times we confuse the first paragraph completely as introduction and we do not give a lot of thought to it. But a good introduction, or any introduction for that matter of fact, should consist of 3 basic parameters. First of which is the attention grabber. So essay is something that has to be inviting. You need to take into account the human factor that goes into an evaluator's mind. So if a dry, mundane sort of start to an essay will not attract or will not gain that sort of attention which would fetch you better marks. So this is not a rocket science, but obviously if you start something, you have to attract people to it. So this is why something like clickbait works so good on a YouTube algorithm. So attention grabber is often mistaken a lot of times as the introduction itself. That is not the case. Attention grabber is simply to attract the attention. So here on further, when we discuss about the different types of introductions per se, we will be focusing on different types of attention grabber, how you can grab the attention of the evaluator. Okay, let's go further. The second part of the essay is the connection. This is where very often students tend to not do enough justice to the topic itself. So once you have the attention, once you have invited the evaluator in, now it is our duty to give him something that is related to our topic. There has to be some follow-up to whatever attention that we have grabbed on. Maybe let's say we used something like a headline basically to approach to attract few attention, the attention of the evaluator. So in that situation, what we'll try and do is we will follow it up with something called as connection. We'll try and build a connection. We will try and say ki whatever way that we grabbed your attention is not basically just a clickbait, but there is substance to what we were saying. We were not lying basically. So this is where you form a connection. Okay, and the third part of it, as we come towards the conclusion of the essay, that is the later half, maybe the second paragraph. If you're writing a 2-paragraph essay, on an average, if your essay, introduction is basically 1 page, so this subject of the essay will definitely come towards the latter half of the page. towards the end. So in subject of the essay, it is not enough just to give a good introduction. You have to ensure how it gets connected to the topic itself, topic of the essay itself. So this is where subject of the essay comes into picture. So once we have the attention, we will build on it, we'll try and form a connection out of it, and then at the end of the introduction, we will try and connect it to the subject of the essay. So these three parameters, when done right, will give you a very good form of introduction. Okay. So once we have some basic idea about how to grab attention and this thing, we will try and find. Okay. So now, once we have an idea about what constitutes in the parts of the essay, we will try and identify a few easy methods, easy techniques that we can use to basically grab attention. Okay, so introduction, here on when we discuss the different types of introduction, we are basically trying to discuss different methods to grab attention. Okay, let's get started. So these are going to be the 5 different techniques that we will use in order to grab the attention. Okay. So the first of which is the classical definition. We will try and use a definition. We will try and create some sort of, we'll try and use our creative energies to give it a nice spin. The next one is the quote based method. The third is survey or a headline method. Fourth is a question based method, and the fifth one is the anecdote, of which 4 of these techniques we will discuss in this video. For anecdote, we will have a separate video which will be lined up for the next one. If you are interested only in anecdote, you can switch on to the next video.
Next video?
No. Next video nahi. So this is same video that we are continuing. Okay.
Next video.
If you are only interested in anecdote, switch to the next video, because these are the 4 that we are going to discuss in this video. Okay, so definition. So this is one of the easiest form in order to write an essay introduction, but यहाँ पे there is a caveat. You cannot use definition everywhere. So in order to use a definition method for to start an introduction, we have to ensure that there is some form of keyword. There has to be some keyword that you can define. If there are no keywords, what exactly will you define? So for example, let me take globalization as an example. Now this example is specifically chosen because it's quite easy and relatable for the most of the students. We all know what globalization is. So now let's say we decided to use the definition that is being given by Kinshi Oheb. Now ते असंच राहू द्या, मला जरा सोपं चाललंय ते. Okay.
मध्ये पाच जाईल मी.
Okay. Okay. So now let us start by the definition method. In definition method, so let us start by definition method. In definition method, you need to understand that this is a very simple method, very easy method. Okay, so this is a method that most of you will be able to use very comfortably. But there's a caveat. We can only use this method when we know that there are certain keywords that can be defined. What will you define if there's nothing to define? Because there are a lot of topics, particularly quote based or let's say philosophical topics, which do not exactly consist of any keyword that you'll be able to define. So this is one caveat that we need to keep in mind. Other than that, let's say for this in this particular scenario, let's try and use globalization as an example. So globalization, let's say we have decided to use a definition that's given by Kinshi Oheb. Kinshi Oheb defined globalization as a borderless world. ठीक है, we straight away start with explaining what exactly is our understanding. So Kinchi defined globalization as a world that is borderless. So what exactly is meant by borderless will be our connection. That is where we will build on. ठीक है, that will explain what exactly he means by borders, maybe geographical borders. So geographical or physical borders. Then there is economic borders, ठीक है, political borders in that sort of sense. So that will form our connection. ठीक है, and then we will come to the topic whatever is the subject. ठीक है, provided that this essay is on globalization. Okay, so what are the main advantages? The main advantages, as I already mentioned you, कि if you cannot come up with any sort of topic, if you cannot come up with any sort of introduction, this is the easiest way to go. ठीक है, you don't have to think about anything. You know the keyword, you know you have to define it, and you just start with it. ठीक है, so it is one of the easiest method, one of the very to the point method. ठीक है, you will straight up start with the topic without beating around the bush. So that's a great advantage. ठीक है, so easiest. Okay, what are the disadvantages? Again, that's the same thing, because most of the students will end up using this technique. The edge that we are trying to get while we practice this sort of essays and everything, that edge might be lost. ठीक है, our start of the essay might become cliche or mundane. Okay, so that is the biggest disadvantage. It's an average start basically, not creative. Okay, but the second disadvantage can be tackled. ठीक है, so in order to make sure that you want to use definition method because it's a great tool to have in your arsenal, but at the same time you don't want to fall prey to this disadvantage, always make sure that you write your definitions not in a textual sense. ठीक है, try and create your own definitions as per the demand of the essay. That will ensure that your definition of any of the keyword is not exactly the same as anyone else. Okay, now let's come up with the final part about where can we use this method. Okay, so definition method, as I mentioned, can be used for almost all the technical essays. Technical essays are essays on any of the specific topics. We can talk about economics, let's say poverty, social issues, democracy or something like that also. These are political issues. Environmental, ठीक है, environmental essays पे भी maybe you can use. There will be some sort of keyword that will require a definition. Maybe sustainable development comes to my mind right now. So that is one method. So this is almost a universal method to start your introduction. Only exception that comes to my mind is maybe some sort of philosophical essays or quote based essays, proverb based essays, which do not exactly consist of any keyword. That is where you won't be able to use it. Okay, let's start with the next method, that is हे ना थोडंसं इथे पाहिजे आता थोडा मी मध्ये येतोच आहे त्याच्या टेक्स्टच्या अजून पलीकडे शिफ्ट करायला पाहिजे होतं ठीक आहे Okay, so let's start with the next method, that is the quote based method. So quote based method is again a very popular method amongst the UPSC and MPSC aspirants. MPSC aspirants मध्ये नाही आहे popular. Okay, so let's start with the second method. Second method that we have today for discussion is the quote based method. So basically you write a quote that is relevant to the topic. So quote based method again is a very popular method to start an essay. ठीक है, particularly when it comes to the civil essays. ठीक है, but there are some major factors that we need to keep in mind, particularly when it comes to these sort of topics. Okay, so let's take an example. So one of the examples that comes to my mind is do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better. Okay, so very simple सा quote है, but this quote is this quote is something that will fit very appropriately for one of the PYQs when UPSC essays, that is there are better practices to best practices. So let's say you are trying to write that essay and you know this quote already. That's an excellent fit, like that's a jigsaw match. Okay, perfect. Okay, so there are obvious advantages. When done correct, it is very impressive. Okay, if you have an appropriate quote for let's say an appropriate topic and you use it properly, it's an excellent method to go ahead with this method. Okay, so it is an excellent method without any doubt. Okay, but यहाँ पे the biggest problem is to match it properly. Okay, so most of the times we are short of quotes. Okay, short of quotes as in we may know, let's say 100 or 1000 quotes we have compiled over years and we have rigorously studied it, but it is very hard to find a quote that perfectly fits a topic. Okay, maybe you can create one, or there might be an exception and you will be able to create one sort of quote which will come in UPSC exam, on which a very relevant topic might be asked in UPSC exam, but that chances are very slim. Okay, so this does not mean that you should not have quotes in bank. You should always have a few quotes in bank that will enrich your essay. Okay, but to start with this method, the biggest caveat that we can find is to find an appropriate quote. To find the right match. That is the biggest problem. Okay. The other problem that encounters in this case is something related to the first problem itself. So what at times happens is we are not able to find a relevant quote and we want to use this particular method only for that essay. So what ends up is we write a very generic example of the quote. Let's say we all know that cliched example where we talk about, when it comes to an environmental essay, we would start something like with a quote quoting Bapu, Gandhiji, saying that the world has enough for everyone's need but not a single person's greed. Okay, so but what happens is our effort to sound ingenuine, our effort to sound distinguished from other students, that gets lost. Okay, because it's a very generic quote, it's used over and over, and as per I think recent discussions going online, ठीक है हे नको टाकायला टँजंट चाललो आपण. ओके, रिसेंट डिस्कशन्स पासून कट करू. ठीक आहे, सो डिसएडवांटेज. सो द सेकंड डिसएडवांटेज that comes to my mind is also something that's related to first. What happens is at times in an effort to write a quote itself, we tend to use a very generic quote. ठीक है, let's say we are writing an environmental essay, we'll quote Gandhiji saying the world has enough for one person's everyone's need but not a single person's greed. Okay, so this, although is a very good quote standalone, it is a very generic quote. Okay, most of the students who will opt for, let's say, that environmental essay and want to use quote based method to start will tend to sort of use it. Okay, so the chances of sounding generic is very high, so we'll try and avoid that. So try and find quotes that are thoda sa different. Okay, they are ingenuine. Okay, one more advantage that we have that I forgot to mention is you need not stick to just English essays, English quotes. Maybe you can use something in Sanskrit. Okay, there are very beautiful quotes present in Sanskrit. It's just that you will have to put in some effort and find those quotes. Okay, make a compilation, not huge, at least 10-15 quotes you should have on various different topics based on the previous year's analysis. Okay, you can even use Hindi or your regional language, but regional language is something that I would recommend you to avoid. Try and do that only if you are too desperate. Okay, if you have nothing else and you know a very good quote from your regional language, only then you should go for it. Okay, now where to use it is very easy. You have a relevant quote, you have a relevant topic, so if it's a perfect match, you can use it in any topic, be it technical, philosophical, okay, any topic that you have, you will be able to find decent quotes, and if it matches perfectly, there is universal application. So that's one of the major advantages as well, okay, it is universal. Okay, so this is it about the quote based method. Now let's move on further.
अजून एकच व्हिडिओ चाललाय का आपला?
हा पहिलाच व्हिडिओ आहे, ठीक. तो त्याच्याचमुळे ॲनेक्डोटमध्ये भरपूर डिटेल्स आहेत बारीक बारीक, त्यामुळे त्याला वेगळ्या याच्यात टाकावं लागलं. Okay, so the next method that we have in front of us is basically survey or a headline method. ठीक है, survey or headline basically is using factual data, ठीक है, which is present, which is generally considered as universal, ठीक है, maybe we can quote some incidents or something like that, ठीक है, in a headline. ठीक है, basically what the newspaper headlines do, particularly front page newspaper, they'll try and be as creative as possible in order to attract readers into reading, ठीक है, whatever is the content written. So similar is the what you can say idea behind using a headline in your essay. So survey is thoda different. Survey is basically trying to quote interesting surveys, interesting facts, trivia basically. So everybody loves a trivia, ठीक है, some caveat, some small piece of information which is not common knowledge or something like that, so that spikes interest. Okay, so again we are coming back to what I mentioned before, ki this is all about trying to grab the attention of the evaluator, ठीक है. So this is again a very nice method to do it. So one of the examples that I've taken is ki almost 1 lakh lives are lost to flood in past 70 years as per the reports of NDMA, ठीक है. So this is थोड़ा सा dry statement that I've mentioned, but यहाँ पे it is important to highlight कि 1 lakh lives, that's a huge number, ठीक है, in past 70 years, ठीक है. So that's a huge number that is going to attract eyeballs, attentions. Maybe इसके आगे you can use this sort of information when it comes to human security, disaster management, security in general, or environmental problems, ठीक है. In these sort of topics you'll be able to use it. Okay, so what is the advantage? Advantage, it's easy method, ठीक है, it's quite easy to use this sort of method. Okay, एकच मिनिट नाही तर दिलं असेल मी. Advantage मध्ये आपल्याला
टेबलवर ठेवलाय बाजूला.
हां तिथेच ठेवतो.
एडिट करताना सोपं जातं.
सुरुवातीपासून करू का मग या टॉपिकच्या?
हो.
ठीक आहे.
ते काढा ना पेनचं, ते आतमध्ये जाऊ.
मी इथे क्लिक केलं की जाते. Okay, so the third method. Okay, so the third method that we have on our hands is the survey or headline method. ठीक है, as the name suggests, we'll try and use some interesting trivia fact based on survey, or we'll try and use some sort of headline to grab the attention. ठीक है. So as news headlines, as regularly that newspapers and everything we read, we know that the headlines are tailored in such a fashion to get maximum attention from the reader, ठीक है. So similar is the idea here. We'll try and use an interesting headline, creative headline, so that we'll be able to grab the attention of the evaluator. Okay, so one of the examples that I've chosen for this particular case is 1 lakh lives being lost in past 70 years as per the reports of NDMA. ठीक है, NDMA के reports के अनुसार we have lost more than 1 lakh lives. ठीक है. So यहाँ पे 1 lakh is very important. Maybe you'll try and highlight it. ठीक है. So 1 lakh is a huge number. It is bound to attract attention. ठीक है. So this, although this in this particular scenario I have used a very dry language, so we also have to ensure that our language is not dry. ठीक है. We have to be थोड़ा सा more creative when it comes to put these sort of sentences. Okay. So what is the biggest advantage? Biggest advantage is that it is easy to use. ठीक है. Maybe we don't know this particular factual detail. ठीक है. Maybe we know something else that is factually correct. Ki, let's say in this particular disaster management, maybe we can talk about Uttarakhand floods, Chennai floods, Mumbai floods. ठीक है. How often our cities are being flooded. So that again is using different sort of headlines. ठीक है. So it does not exactly have to be so factual. ठीक है. But if you use factual data, that gives another advantage of covering a factual part of the essay. ठीक है. So covering the factual part is also very important. So let me give you some basic understanding of human psyche. If at the very beginning of the essay you give an impact or you make the statement using some factual data, the absence of factual data throughout your further essay will not be noticed to that what you can say extent. ठीक है. जिसको हम लोग बोल सकते हैं कि मे बी उसका जो कमी महसूस नहीं होगा, बिकॉज यू स्टार्टेड द एसे इटसेल्फ विद अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्चुअल इंफॉर्मेशन. ठीक है. सो दैट इम्पैक्ट विल अगेन कैरी आउट, will take you through the entire essay. ठीक है. So if you have some relevant factual detail, maybe you can use it here. When it comes to survey, it's थोड़ा सा different. ठीक है. So basically the idea goes that everybody loves a trivia fact. ठीक है. Some factoid, some small information which is not exactly very common knowledge. ठीक है. In that sense, maybe we can use or quote a survey. Basically, what you can say, if you want to quote something like rural urban digital divide basically, or rural urban migration, what are people's opinion, interstate migration, what are exactly people's opinion. So most of the people, they are not in favor of there are multiple surveys that are being conducted, there are multiple reports that are being out. So throughout our GS preparation we read all of these reports. ठीक है. सो माइग्रेशन डेटा है, उस पर कोई रिपोर्ट है, और देयर इज अ सर्वे दैट्स बीइंग कैरिड आउट. सो बेस्ड ऑन दैट वी कैन यूज सम सॉर्ट ऑफ फैक्टॉइड और इंटरेस्टिंग इंफॉर्मेशन बेसिकली टू स्टार्ट आवर एसे. ओके, आई होप दैट इज क्लियर. Okay, so what is the disadvantage of basically survey or headline method? Okay, so what is the disadvantage of this method? So major disadvantage is that unless you quote a proper source, you are likely to sound ingenuous. The facts may sound very made up. ठीक है. So it is very important to know the source, like in this case, as per reports by NDMA, so maybe the issuing authority. So that gives an added advantage of authenticity to whatever you are trying to quote. ठीक है. So this is one of the biggest disadvantage, कि you need to know the exact figures, you need to know the exact issuing authority. ठीक है. So it is hard to fake it in particularly this method. Okay, where you can use it, again one of the universal methods, but it is very impactful if you use it, let's say for social or democratic, or if you have essays on that sort, political or social essays, it will be very impactful if we use this method in those essays. Okay, moving on to the next method. The fourth and final method that we're going to discuss in this particular video is using questions. ठीक है. So again, a very interesting way, very nuanced way. ठीक है. So these questions can either be WH questions or rhetorical questions. ठीक है. So the playing field is open. ठीक है, it is based on your creativity, what sort of information you can conjure up, ठीक है, what sort of interesting take you can give. Based on that we have to frame a question, ठीक है. So one of this is the example that I've chosen, कि who would be willing to lay their lives for an abstract ideal, ठीक है. So this is sort of a sarcastic question कि if there is an abstract ideal, ठीक है, who is exactly willing to lay their lives for it. So इसका obvious answer will be somewhere like the Indian freedom struggle is an what you can say is an counter to this sort of questions ki yes, there are a lot of people who are willing to lay their lives for an ideal of a nation. So by abstract ideal here what we mean is ki it is an imagined this thing ki nation is only on paper. Okay, let's not go there. Okay, so here I've chosen an example that is called as who would be willing to lay their lives for an abstract ideal. Okay. So obviously we have millions of soldiers who lay their lives for the ideal of a nation. Okay. Because we love our nation, we try and lay down our lives. Throughout our freedom struggle, there were millions of freedom fighters who lay down their lives in order to secure freedom for the country. Okay. So this is a sort of rhetorical question or a WH question basically we are trying to ask, which we will answer in the coming part. ठीक है. So basically इसका answer will form the connection of the essay, ठीक है, as discussed before. ठीक है. So again one question method, one of the easiest techniques, ठीक है, and one of the advantages that this method carries, it creates an organic flow. ठीक है, because you are answering the question itself, you need not be more creative while creating the sort of flow. ठीक है, there's an organic flow to it. Okay, so that is one of the major advantages of framing WH questions. So again, this sort of technique can be used in almost universal ठीक है. Okay, so this sort of technique, where can we use it? So again, question and answers method is again universal, but for maximum impact, if this method is used for philosophical essays, it is likely to create more impact. ठीक है. So philosophical essays is one of the domain where you can start with WH questions. So like most of the methods, the disadvantage here being that you have to do it correctly. ठीक है. Unless it shouldn't so happen that you just lay down a question and do not answer that question throughout your essay, that will leave a very negative impact. ठीक है. So in introduction, if you're using a question to grab attention, the following should be the answer to that question. We need to make sure of that. Okay, so here based on this we conclude our first video of the series. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and if you have any doubts, please leave a comment. And for anecdote and further information about common mistakes, how to avoid while writing an introduction, please stay tuned on Lokayan IS YouTube channel. Thank you.